The one piece of advice I would give to anybody who wants to improve their puppet building skills tenfold is to learn how to...
Welcome back to Puppeteers. I'm your host, Cameron Garrity, and today on Puppeteers, we have Adam Krutinger. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Hello. Hey, this is interesting.
It is interesting. I'm sorry, my guest host is on vacation this week, so you just got me here. But Adam, for people who don't know, is a wonderful puppeteer from Buffalo, New York. He has a wonderful wealth of information that he shares with his tutorials online. He has some great puppet builds that he's done a lot of local theater productions, and he also hosts a show called Puppet Tears? Is that right? It's some kind of podcast. Anyway, so Adam Krutinger, welcome to Puppet Tears.
Hi, thank you. Happy to be here.
So let's start where we do with a lot of our guests. What are you up to right now?
Well, right now, I'm in the middle of the Baby Yoda project that people may have been following my streams on Facebook that I'm building live there. It's coming along great. Very mechanical puppet that I decided to make at this time, and it's coming along fine.
That's great. Yeah. I've been following that a lot, and it's just been really great to see it, from the beginning stages. You've been working on it for almost probably a month and a half now or so, at least publicly. I feel like I saw it in your shop, which means it was like over a month ago.
Yeah. No, I've been working on this one a little slower than I normally have. This time of year is always crazy for me around this time of the school year because during the day I'm a full-time elementary school art teacher. And again, at this time it's usually, getting ready for art shows at school and things like that. And just the general wrap up of the school year in these last couple of months. However, that's changed a little bit now, but
right.
There's no shortage of things to do. So
okay, that's great. And so in choosing Baby Yoda, obviously, that's a very popular character right now. But what was it about that, either the character itself or the because he already exists as a puppet? What made you want to say, oh, I want to take on that challenge?
A couple things, because I don't do things like this often, where I make a puppet of a character that already exists that isn't my own design or creation. But and if this isn't a replica, because I'm not making it exactly look like it's going to be stylized out of these materials that I'm using. But it's just, honestly, I just grew up as a big Star Wars fan. Star Wars was a big part of my life growing up. And even though, it's changed a lot, it still is very near and dear to my heart, and especially just Yoda as a character in general, being young, that being one of the most iconic figures of the franchise. Just kind of inspired by. He's got a lot of interesting shapes and stuff going on, and I think the Baby Yoda version is more apt to having this style of puppet made than like the regular Yoda.
Right.
And I think that just makes it kind of interesting to do as well.
Totally. Yeah, and we should clarify for any of the people who are listening, it is not Baby Yoda, it is the child, and it is a baby version of the Yoda species. So just in case anybody was about to comment anything,
I have a whole rant about that, about why that's wrong, but we're not going to get into it right now.
Understood. And I believe that you are planning to use this puppet as a tool for sharing some of your Star Wars theories. Is that something that people have to look forward to?
Yes. That's another thing is a big part of why I'm doing this and making this into a YouTube video is because I have a lot of fan theories that otherwise people would have no reason to hear my fan theories on this to begin with. So I'm going to have this video edited down, because again, it's going to be like 100 hours of footage that I'm going to edit into like a 15-minute long video for YouTube. And then I'm going to put a bunch of my personal theories out in that are pretty ridiculous. But hey, why not?
We don't have anything better to do right now. So
we don't.
Look forward to seeing that. And I definitely want to later on talk about your YouTube builds and your especially your live streams, because that's a really exciting topic. But would love to go back a little bit and find out. You have a very well documented history in a lot of ways. You've done similar conversations like this before, but what kind of kid were you? I know you're one of 9, second the second oldest, but what was growing up with a family like that like for you?
Yeah. Like you said, I'm one of 9 kids, second oldest. So I've got a lot of little younger brothers and sisters below me. Growing up was just, it was great. It was always exciting. Although I wasn't one that necessarily hung out with my brothers or sisters as much as maybe some other people do. We all got along fine, and didn't get along sometimes the way that brothers and sisters do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was always just kind of like making things and tinkering and just doing weird stuff because that's the kind of kid I was.
And so was it a lot of, at that time, like recreating things that you were seeing on TV? Like, was it a lot of mimicry, or was it like, oh, I'm just going to, make a robot today, or...
Yeah. No, it wasn't mimicry at all. Actually, no, I would just I literally just, one of my things was I loved to do when I was young, it was garbage picking. And I'd go around the block and just find, not obviously I wouldn't dig through people's cans, but a lot of times there's things left out, like a lawn chair or something different, and all these little metal pieces and stuff. And I just get them and make weird stuff. Like one of my things, I loved making forts when I was young,
Yeah,
and while I was making forts, I, not only would I make the fort and it'd make it in my basement or something, but I'd make all these contraptions. So I remember finding this weird bell and then putting it in my fort and then tying a string around it and hooking it on some nails to the other end, and then tying it off, and then in order to ring the doorbell, you just untie it, and then the bell would fall in there, so you knew someone was coming. Not that you knew someone was coming anyway, but just
right.
I was pretty young at that point too. But I'd always just find little things and trying to make things out of sticks in the yard. At the time when I was young, I really liked being outside and doing a lot of nature-y stuff. I build forts outside, digging holes, and little. Sometimes there were little things, little almost models. And other times they were big things that I could go inside of.
That's really cool. And such, knowing you now, of course, it's not dissimilar to who you are and the kind of stuff that you make today. No, it's funny. You got me thinking that when I was a kid, we actually, my teachers had to stop me from, this is when I was in first and second grade, from garbage picking just around the school to get little bits of eraser or old paper clips and other, obviously nothing gross, but, and making little things inside my desk of little wire sculptures and other things that you could find, and erasers made great, punching gloves and
that's a good point. I didn't even think of it that way, because that's a lot of times what I did. A lot of the things that I made and still today were inspired by the things around me. So whatever I found would inspire the project, Say, I remember doing the same thing. I loved, if I went to my aunt's or uncle's office, and then he just had, like you said, a bunch of paper clips and rubber bands. What could I make out of that? And just treating it like a challenge like that. Yeah, that's how I approach my work today.
I was going to ask about that, because I imagine as you find, you find a new thing from Dubrow of oh my gosh, this plastic shape is going to be perfect for a spaceman helmet, or this fabric is going to be perfect for a lizard or whatever. I don't know, but I'm just throwing ideas out there.
No, that's very much my exact process, and why me and you clash so much in our process. Because again, mine doesn't generally start off with a script. Mine starts with a globe that I found on Amazon somewhere.
Sure. No, that's that's great. So then, well, actually, one other thing about growing up with all the siblings, because I imagine my dad is one of 6, and he's the youngest of the 6. So in a lot of ways, some of his older brothers and sisters were almost foster parents in a way. And I imagine, like you said, you didn't get necessarily always along with your younger siblings. There had to be a component of not raising them, but I know even like when you had Fred last year, I remember saying like, "Oh, are you ready for it?" And you're like, "I've been changing diapers since I was 3 years old, so it'll be fine."
Yeah, no, not 3, but literally, my mom told me when I was 5, I changed my first
Okay.
diaper. I've
Okay.
been changing diapers my whole life. But yeah, there's definitely that aspect of it, and again, just kind of like the way when you grow up in a big family like that. That kind of goes back to my style of making things. You work with what you have, because I might
Yeah.
only have this because my brother took a bunch of it or took a bunch of that, and even just the way I was raised in that, like my parents, like my mom is an artist too. She was an amazing artist, and then my dad is an engineer. And he's got a very mechanical mindset, a very analytical mind, and I think that's kind of where I get it from. Is definitely a combination of the way both of them think.
That's wonderful. And then, so I know that you have wanted to be an art teacher for a very long time. When did that inkling, was that like when you were a young kid, or when did that happen?
Yeah, I've said before too. Ever since I was in like 5th grade is when I knew I wanted to be an art teacher. I think because that's where I, in school, felt the most free and able to do stuff. It's where I had the most fun when I was in school. And then I realized, like, hey, look, that person's here every day, all day. Yeah. If I want to keep doing this, that's a great way to do it. I can just be the art teacher. And then, and obviously as I got older, I understood how that job was different than I thought, but still very appealing to me in a lot of ways. Once I got into high school, I volunteered for the local art club at one of the elementary schools. And that teacher, Thomas Paul Asklar, became my mentor in a lot of ways as an artist as well as an art teacher. And I learned my teaching style is completely inspired by him and his work.
I love that. And it's a really fitting tribute that for people who have seen your Arlo's Art Show pilot, he was one of the artists featured in that first show. And that's another project I'm looking forward to talking about. But so you mentioned high school, and I know that was a pretty momentous time as well for you, because that was when you met your now wife, Maria. And
we actually met right before it, but yes.
Oh, was
we met at an 8th grade graduation party. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So then it was sophomore year you guys started dating?
No, I think it was right that first year, in October, right after homecoming.
Oh, okay. It was during the graduation party.
Yeah. So yeah, graduation party, then high school started, and right after homecoming. So yeah, October 20th.
Okay, that's right. That's right. So I know, and I know from not only knowing you, but also in other interviews and stuff that you've done, including one on the show, that Maria was a really big inspiration in you finding theater and performing. Was that, I know you kind of gravitated towards that because she was, the lead in all the musicals and stuff, but were you musically inclined? Like, did you enjoy shows and performance, or was it just like, oh, she does that, so I'm going to do that, and I have this maker ability to make costumes and props and stuff?
I think like anyone, you're always just captivated by a really good story. And I was lucky that I was able to see some really good shows when I was younger. But again, it was one of those things where I never really thought about doing it until Maria started doing it. And I did it as a way to spend time with her. And again, yeah, in being involved in these productions, I got to do one thing that I love, which was making things and all kinds of different stuff. Sometimes there'd be an interesting prop we needed for the high school show, and they couldn't find one anywhere. And I'd be like, oh, I'll try to make it. And I just had a lot of fun making stuff with these fun challenges that people didn't know where to even start.
What kind of place did that end up putting you in like the high school hierarchy of sorts?
Oh,
like,
gosh.
was that something that people liked and kind of gravitated towards, or were you like, oh, he's the weird kid who like makes props and stuff in his basement or whatever? Not that matters. I'm just curious.
Yeah, not that it doesn't matter. No. Yeah, I think it was definitely seen as kind of a weird kid. And I was we kind of were our own little group, me and my friends. There was those kind of typical groups, but we were just kind of like some bunch of others that just did our own thing for the most part. But another big thing for me at that time was, because I wasn't doing puppetry at this time, but was as a magician, which is in a lot of ways, which that was also inspired by doing theater in high school, because I was in a summer show in high school where one of the other kids was a magician, and we did Godspell, and we used these appearing canes, and I was just like, oh my gosh, where did you get those? That's so cool,
man.
And then they said, oh, we got them from Elmwood Magic. So I went to Elmwood Magic, which was a really big, actually a very well-known magic store around the world that happened to be right here in Buffalo. And I went there, and then the guy there, he showed me a bunch of tricks in person. I was completely sold. And then I was doing magic and started doing like professional shows right away at birthday parties, tons of elementary schools all over Western New York. I was in multiple restaurants locally. At one point, I was in 3 restaurants at one time. A different day of the week for weeks. I mean, for years. Yeah,
I mean, you were a full-time magician for a while, right? I mean,
yeah. During college, I was. Yeah. Again, it was full-time because it didn't take very much money for me to survive at that time at my own.
right.
One little apartment, and again, it did not take much. But one thing I was grateful for is like a lot of my other friends were working 35 hours a week at flipping burgers or something, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I was able to just do 2 or 3 magic shows a week and make just about the same and be able to make art and do my own thing and not just be stressed out.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah, you long for those days when you only needed like $100 a week or whatever to to get by.
Yeah, those were the good old days. Yeah.
Right. So when you were doing that, because obviously, you did it for a while. So what were some things that you learned as a performer when you were doing those magic shows? Because I'm sure that laid some of the foundation, if not a lot of the foundation, for when you started doing things like the Nimmels or other performance stuff.
Yeah. Because, it's just hard to say, because for so long I was so shy, and I would never have seen myself on stage or performing in front, or even speaking in front of anybody. There's something I didn't like to do even in class, especially because of my speech. All growing up, I was, and many of my siblings as well, went through a lot of speech therapy. All through elementary, all through middle school, and then actually when I went into high school, they said, "We've done all we can for you." We're not doing any more speech therapy. You've gotten this far. Good luck, keep going, which was fine and totally understandable too. I don't even think it would have fit in my schedule at all. But I just had a terrible speech impediment. It was saying the letter R. Just wasn't that. That letters didn't come out. It came out more like an L or an O, and that's just how I've always spoke.
That's great for having a last name like Krutinger.
Yes, yes, definitely. But obviously, at this point, I've very much so overcome that. We can talk about that a little bit later.
Sure.
But having the magic to do was something kind of to hide behind in a way, in the same way that playing a character on stage is, in the same way that using a puppet is. The focus wasn't necessarily on me for the magic tricks. It was about what was happening, about those moments. And, and especially since something like magic, you don't even need language to really get, I could do magic for someone who doesn't speak any English at all. And when something disappears, I don't have to tell them it disappears. It's just gone, and they're like, "Oh," So that didn't matter when I did magic, at least for what I was doing at the time.
Sure. No, and I think that was one of the reasons that I loved puppetry so much, especially because, when people see you in the hallways or something in elementary school or high school, all they see is you that Cam's carrying a doll around, or for you, you're carrying a prop. But when you get to show that to people and show them that you can bring it to life and you could do this otherworldly thing with it, that's when you start to buy people's clout a little bit. Or especially, I always found that I wanted to go to school with my teachers, not the other students around me, because they had some more buy-in. And I'm sure finding those audiences where like every day you could impress people with, you know, disappearing tricks or revealing canes or whatever. That had to be, really formative.
Yeah. Well, another thing is too is because I was doing a lot of theater around that time as well. And when you do theater, you know, there's a whole cast of people, you know, and I think, you know, I give me being a magician a lot of credit to me learning how to present myself by myself, you know. I didn't need to. I couldn't hide behind another cast member or just be in the background. You know, like a lot of times, if you want to start your own puppet show, it's gonna start off at least just kind of being you. And I don't know if I would have had the confidence to do what I'm doing now if I didn't start off doing magic and kind of inherently learn a lot of those things.
No, I love that. And that's a really good transition then into you coming into puppetry. And I know, you know, you just as recently as the Terry Angus episode, you kind of shared how meeting Zach and seeing his Sebastian character was a huge inspiration to you. But I know you built a puppet before that. So I know puppetry was kind of in your, not on your radar, but like you at least understood it and stuff. What was your, like when you watch something like you talked about Star Wars, and I know you would be able to appreciate, you know, characters like Yoda or Chewbacca or whatever for just the fact that they were really good characters, but was seeing Sebastian like what opened your eyes to all other kinds of like puppets and costume characters and stuff?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because again, I know we've talked about this many times on the show, but again, like I never saw characters from like things like Star Wars and the Muppets and things as being made. I just saw them as characters. I was completely hook, line, and sinker, just pulled into the illusion. In the same way, you wouldn't wonder if you saw Robin Williams in a movie, you wouldn't wonder, oh, how is he made? Like, no, it's like it's just him, right?
Right.
That's how I saw these characters.
Yeah, I knew that was the case for like the Muppet characters, but I wasn't sure for
everything. I was super gullible.
Okay.
Completely fooled me. I had never thought for a second about where it came from or why. You know, in the same way, again, you don't think about where a cartoon drawing comes from. You know, it's just like it's just there.
Right. Yeah. No. And I mean, it's incredible to then think about, again, fast forwarding to the work that you do now in creating these things that hopefully you know, your students or other young people who find your work, it's so accessible for them to see puppetry. I mean, you could Google puppets, you know, type puppets into Google and you're, you know, at the very least something that's going to come up quickly on a YouTube search, if not a Google search as well. And to have someone like you breaking that stuff down is just so important, I think, because it allows people to appreciate, you know, have that realization that you had, you know, in 2008, you know, when they're 8.
Yeah, I don't know if maybe they do. I never thought of that being someone's first exposure to you know, the pull behind the curtain, because at this time I currently don't have too much performance stuff on the channel. Other than short films and commercials and stuff that we've done in the past. It's something I do want to integrate more so in the future in many ways. But yeah, people exploring the internet could definitely stumble across it.
Sure. And yeah, and I guess I'm attributing it to, like, you know, if someone, you know, kids these days are able to be curious and, you know, they have that information at their fingertips. So if they see something like Star Wars and, you know, all they have to do is type in, you know, Chewbacca puppet or whatever, or now Yoda puppet. And there's a good chance that something like yours might come up. So you had this kind of ambassador to the world of puppetry in Zach Halmiser, who's obviously a good friend of ours. And I imagine just knowing his preferences, I'm sure that was some of your like first real education about the Muppets, but were there other kinds of puppets at that point that you were looking into finding out more? Like what was your education process in learning how to build those first cast of characters, like your frogs and Gordon, and I could think of like reindeer puppets and stuff that you made. Like how did you figure it out when you were getting started? Because again, even in like 2008, 2009, there wasn't as many resources as there is even now.
No, definitely. I would just say too, like soon after discovering that, I heard of Avenue Q, and that's really what made me, I think, fall in love with puppetry more so. Because we've said it tons of times, is again, I was never really interested in the Muppets growing up, or
Right.
really that so much into Sesame Street. Avenue Q is really what kind of bit me with the bug of that style of puppetry, and just finding pictures. One of the first books I got was Jim Henson's The Works, which has a lot of really nice behind the scenes pictures. I have the behind the scenes book to Avenue Q, that furry little book, which has, I don't think it has too many behind the scenes ones from the making standpoint, but there's definitely some.
No. There's definitely some, and I think also what's great about that book that I think not even The Works has is like very close up pictures of like all of the characters.
Yes.
Which is helpful.
Definitely coming in that close, and that, you're right. That's a good point, and that's what's so inspiring to me. Those things is, a lot of things can look nice from far away, but when you have the confidence to get that close up with a puppet, and it looks that nice still, it's just, man, it's something to aim to for sure.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So we know that your First Avenue Q puppets were a little larger than they maybe needed to be.
Yeah.
But when I met you in 2011, I remember watching like as you made some more puppets, and I think right after I met you, you like remade Zach's. You remade the Sebastian, the Terry Angus puppet of his, and you were doing you were starting to do Muppet builds not too long after that. You actually made a set of Avenue Q puppets. Can you talk about just like, because I feel like I was able to see how you learned something new with every new puppet you made. And it truly was like, there's nothing that's going to make you better at building puppets than just building more puppets. Yeah. And hopefully throwing away some of the old ones so you don't even want them around anymore.
Yeah.
Can you talk about just like maybe the question is like, when did you start feeling confident in the builds that you were making versus like, oh, I'm not as good as the Terry Angus frog that Zach has. I need to get better at this.
It's a good question. I'm not exactly sure when that moment hit. It was definitely gradual, because like with a lot of stuff, it's like there's when you're beginning to learn something, there are humongous leaps in your skill and humongous leaps in what you're learning, because everything's new. And after a while that you keep doing stuff, the growth becomes smaller and smaller as you go on. So I would say, around that time, after I built and designed an original set of puppets for a local production of Avenue Q, that build alone is where I learned the most, because that was the most amount of puppets I've ever built in the shortest amount of time. And that was just really a humongous learning curve for me. I think that was like 2011 that I was building those puppets for a show that was in 2012. And I was building puppets before that, and I was happy with them. But yeah, just again, like you said, the volume. You learn. The best way to learn something is by doing it. That's one thing. I get a lot of questions from people who they're about to make their first puppet, and they ask me like tons and tons of questions, and I'm happy to answer them best I can. But there's nothing you will learn more from just diving in, and it's just a matter of getting over that anxiety of being afraid to make a mistake.
Yeah, that's a huge component, and I think, allowing yourself to make those mistakes, and a lot of times, and I'm sure you feel the same way, like those are mistakes that only you see, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm sure like today we've talked about it. You would not want, you know, if you had the chance, you would remake all those Avenue Q puppets. But they're still touring around
yeah, absolutely.
locally. But
Yeah.
right? I mean, cause like
Yeah, I cringe a little bit when
they're
I
a
see 'em.
quality set of Avenue Q puppets. But so yeah, so as long as you know, you know, it's a lot. It's you want to be at a place where you continue to see your mistakes, so you're not getting complacent. But anybody else in the general public will still be able to be dazzled by what you create.
And that's one thing too. I would just say for people who are starting to put themselves out there about this stuff or afraid to post stuff too, because I think it also gives you a little bit of false gratification as well, is knowing who you're. You know, when you get responses, see where it's coming from too, because it's one thing, you know, if all of your family and friends say that's great versus other people in the industry saying that's great, or vice versa, saying that it's not good, and that's important feedback. When you get feedback, whether it's negative or positive, it's important to see where it's coming from, and even if they're coming from a place of negativity. Trying to look past that and see if there's any value in the critique on its own, because it's so easy to take stuff personal when it's something that you're making, because there's a piece of yourself in there too, you know.
Yeah.
And when you put something out there, it's very easy to criticize something, you know, but it's hard to put yourself out there. So one thing I just say to people in general, when people do put themselves out there, try to be, you know, constructive in criticism. But and I don't know, it's hard, because some people say, well, I'm not looking for constructive criticism, I'm just putting it out there. But people are going to do it anyway, you know. Right. So you kind of have to just grow thick skin. I think we veered a bit off of the topic there, but
no, that's okay. I mean, this part of the conversation was just about putting your own work out there. And you know, I imagine, you know, in those early days, you know, now we both have, you know, hundreds, if not, I mean, you possibly have thousands of people at your fingertips who are really wonderful puppetry artists who are able to get you feedback if you wanted it. And doing early shows like Avenue Q or Cinderella, or I'm trying to think of like some of your early shows that you did puppets for, you know, potentially puts you on the radar for a wonderful person like a John Little to see your stuff and reach out.
You know, actually, one more thing I just want to add now that we're on that topic is a piece of advice I'd give to people who want to start doing more puppetry stuff. Because at the end of the day, because you know how I was saying before is that you learn something from every puppet that you build.
Right.
But the problem is people are like, well, I don't want to build hundreds of puppets in order to get to one nice one, right?
Yeah.
Or I don't need hundreds of puppets. I need one or two, and I want them to be good, you know? I don't want to go through all that work to get there. So what's a way to make puppets without necessarily having it to be all necessarily on your expense? And having those kinds of opportunities of working with local theaters like that local production of Avenue Q. That was, not only was it funded by the theater company, I also got paid a little bit for it too. A little bit compared to what it should have cost. But anything's better than nothing, especially if you're at the beginning of your career. So one thing I would say is for people is to try to get involved with local theaters, because again, it's not a great way to make a lot of money, but it's a good way to be able to start working on projects and not necessarily it becoming a complete expense to you. You know, you'll never probably you're not going to get rich doing puppets for theaters, local theaters, and for the hourly work that you're doing, you're probably not even necessarily making that much money, you know, but you get a lot of experience. And you know, for me, there's nothing I get more gratification from than seeing the puppets being used, you know, because in the past I've sold some stuff on eBay, and when I put it in the box, that was the last time I saw it, you know. Right. And but once in a while there's a couple of them that have done well, like that Arlo Monster has his own YouTube channel, and it's way bigger than mine will ever be, because he did it right. But so it's so there's a lot of pride I get in seeing that thing do well, just because it's like, even though I'm not involved in this thing, there was a little piece of something that I did even though it's not me, whatever. I
Yeah.
don't care.
No, and so that's going to be one of the quote graphics of just Adam Cruiser. I don't care. No,
What? I don't care.
Kidding. No, two follow-ups to two comments I want to make about the kind of about doing theater puppets, and is one, if you were lucky, potentially those puppets, if they're durable, can then not only be used for that show, but you potentially can get a kickback on rentals. I'm not saying that happens often, but there's
I hate renting.
but
I hate renting. It's the worst.
Well,
When I'm
Fair
done with a project, I want to be done with it. I don't want to get them back dirty and broken. It breaks my heart a little bit. But I do see the value in it, and I understand why people do it. And if you want to do it, that's fine. I'm just saying it breaks a little piece of me is broken every time they come back. But anyway, one more thing I just wanted to add to that too is because we talked about Avenue Q, and we talked about you mentioned Cinderella. I've actually done a whole bunch of stuff for local theater, the Theater of Youth, doing lots and lots of projects, because people think, oh, well, a show like Avenue Q only comes around once in a while. There's a lot of shows that involve puppetry, but not in the way you necessarily are thinking about it. And that's also not only given me an opportunity to work on those projects, but also to diversify my work. Because, again, a lot of people I know see my work and they see a certain style. And fair enough. If you look at me peripherally, that's all you see. But I've done a lot of very diverse work. It could be more diverse, and I always love those opportunities. But yeah, you get to really stretch those muscles by doing things like one of them was the puppets I did for The Borrowers. So in that show, the puppets, I had to make puppets of the people for when they were small versions with the other live actors, and also for when they were full size. I did some puppets, like I did this giant bee puppet that had to be like to scale of what they would be at that size. And those are puppets that I never really would have made on my own, but I got to stretch some of those creative muscles, and there's definitely things I would have done differently, but it worked fine for that. We did Bunnicula, which was a really interesting project. They had a lot of cool puppets in it, and yeah, a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, the Stella Luna puppets, I think, are one of the more recent builds you did for the Theater of Youth. And
yes, no, I'm
those
glad you mentioned that.
Those, especially I didn't get to see the show because it's usually during the daytime as one of the big performance times for that, and with work and stuff. But the promotional photos for Stella Luna were absolutely beautiful. Seeing those performed.
Yeah, that they did a really, really beautiful job with that show. That's actually probably one of the shows I'm proudest of for the local theater. And they did such a great job with the performances and everything with the sets and the performers. It all just worked so well together, and it turned out to be a beautiful, beautiful show.
And something else that I wonder if you would agree with this about doing puppets for theater as opposed to film puppets is that they don't need to look good in a close-up. So not that you're not going to do, your best work on it, but if there are small little details or something that aren't quite, at a Muppet level from a finish standpoint, like they're going to look good on stage from the front row or certainly the back row.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, a couple of things I would just say to that. But you're absolutely right. But one thing I'd always say is aim high, kind of like what you were mentioning.
Of course.
Always try to do your best work as you can, but also be smart about it. The things that I aim high on in those types of situations are things that I know the value will come from me learning it. Okay, like, this is overkill for this part of this technique, but I'm going to learn this that I'm going to use on my next puppet. And I'd rather experiment here on this, since it's not going to be seen that close up, rather than experiment where it will.
I love that. Yeah, I remember you took a trip to New York years ago, and in the same trip you got to go backstage at Avenue Q, and you also visited the Henson workshop, which was just, I remember you coming back, and it was like you had gone like on a treasure hunt or something, and you came back with all this great information. But I remember you saying about like the small details and stuff. I remember you talking about the Bad Idea Bears, and you saying like they don't have fingers, it's just a finger pad, and you're just like, because you don't see it, you don't need to do it.
Oh, yes.
Which was kind of a cool
No,
thing.
yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
my point I was going to make. And we've talked about this in things before, is even though you should always aim high and make it a learning opportunity, don't do more than you necessarily have to if you're not going to learn anything from it. So, like, build to the job is just advice I would give to people, because it's, it's what... if you know how it's going to be used, if someone's going to do a pilot show and they need a puppet and they don't know exactly how it's going to be used yet, in that case, maybe when I'm making the puppet, I'll do all the underskin underneath, and I'll do, make it so it can be used in many different ways. But generally, when I build for myself and I know how it's going to be used, I don't do that. Like, if I build a character and I know it has a shirt on and it's never going to be taken off, I don't waste the fabric on covering the body, or even I see some people that use that same fleece for the neck sleeve all the way down. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's never going to be seen. You may as well switch it out for something that is going to be a little bit more inexpensive and save it, especially since now we're in a point where that type of fleece is very hard to get.
Certainly. Yeah. And it's funny. In my Facebook, like, memories thing today, it came up, a series of images that were featured in your, when we did your art gallery at the Geppetto, and we had an information pane explaining, the puppet that you made for, Before Christmas.
Yeah.
The wife in that, who didn't have a body, because we knew, that you were never going to see that body. And we actually wrote that, like, you weren't going to see it, so you didn't make it, because, you had 48 hours. So that was all you got.
Yeah, that puppet had a head and one hand. And then all I did is I think it was an extra head laying around, used it as a body, and just draped fabric around it and just pinned it for a sleeve. But it looked great on the camera, and it was nothing more than what it needed to be for that project.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I love stuff like that. Kind of going behind the curtain a little bit, or under the bed sheet in that case. That was dumb.
That was dumb.
Yeah.
and mildly inappropriate.
Just a bit. So let's talk for another minute or two about that New York trip, because I remember you, like I said, you coming back and sharing stuff with me, and that being like core memories for me in terms of learning about puppets. But I'm sure for you, just the wealth of information. Can you talk about that trip and maybe how that kind of informed a lot of your work moving forward?
Yeah, one thing I'll talk about first is just how I was able to see those things behind the scenes. In order to get behind the scenes for Avenue Q, I knew I was going to New York to do a mini show with Zach and my buddy Dan. But I wanted to seize the day. That's one thing it's kind of become a little bit of a philosophy of me. Like, if I'm going to do something, I want to try to get as much out of it as I can. So what I did was I looked at all the puppet things to do there, which was not a lot, and some of it isn't even technically a thing. But I saw that they had Avenue Q, so we bought tickets to see Avenue Q. And what I did was I did this months before we left. I looked online for the cast, and I found the cast. And I sent a private message to every single person in the cast saying, like, hey, I'm a puppeteer from Buffalo. I'm coming to New York to see your show. I'm so excited to see it. Is there any possible way I could, talk to you guys or go backstage? And none of them responded except for one. But it only took one. Again, I sent like 15 emails, but one person said yes. And if they didn't say yes, then I'm like, what do I lose? I sent a couple messages.
Right.
Big deal, But one person said yes, and then I got to go backstage, and it was awesome. And then it was the same thing for the being able to look at the Sesame Workshop. I just thought of, like, do I know anyone who would potentially... Oh, at first I called them. And I was like, hey, I'm in town. Can I do... This is, before I knew anybody.
Right.
Can I get a tour? And they're like, oh, we don't do that. I'm like, oh, okay. So then I messaged a couple people and got no responses. And one person said, yeah, hey, just tell them I sent you. And I called back like a couple hours later. Oh, so-and-so sent me. They're like, oh, sure, let's come tomorrow this time. I was like, awesome. So, I think a lot of people are afraid to hear no. And that's one thing I think I'm pretty proud of myself, because it does take a long time to get over it, but no doesn't really affect me anymore. It just takes,
Right.
I mean, and I think it's also part of me growing up, being one of 9 kids, you get used to hearing no a lot, especially in those types of situations. And I just focus on the positives instead of the negatives. And it's been very, it's given me some opportunities to do things that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to do.
No, I think that's a really important thing. And, that's, I had a similar experience, right when I was, had first met you in 2011, of also like sending a bunch of emails to people saying like, hey, I'm not looking for a job at Sesame Street, but I would just love to see that. I'd just love to see the set. Can you, and I sent, probably a dozen or more emails, and like you said, all it takes is one.
Yeah.
And sometimes you hear an outright no, and sometimes you don't get a response at all, and that sometimes actually hurts worse than the no.
That's one thing I'd love to do some days. See the set. That'd be awesome. I've never gone there. Yeah, I just went to the workshop, which was still awesome.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. And so let's talk about that for a sec. Like, are there, because it's not an easy thing for just anybody to go and visit. So like, what were some of the main things that you learned from that trip to Sesame or behind the scenes of Avenue Q?
So I'll mention the Avenue Q one first, because that's where I went first. And there is like very well, I was shocked by how small the puppets were. I couldn't believe it, because in the photos of that book that I had, they look so much bigger. It's amazing what just that 1 foot of perspective does in scaling the puppets, because I thought I was doing a really good job scaling them. Like I've mentioned before, like I measured the glasses on, I think it was Rick Lyon's head, and compared it to the puppet. And then I rounded down a little bit, because knowing it was further forward, but I did not. I was way off, and when I saw those puppets in person, I was shocked by how small they were. And then same thing when I went to see them. Well, actually, a little bit different when I went to the workshop for the Henson workshop. Is they had at the time, they happened to have been, I think they were refurbishing all the Fraggles, and I was surprised by how big those were. Those were a little bit bigger than I expected, because obviously those are designed. In the show, they're much smaller, and I know there's the mech version, and that's not even what I mean. I just even mean because in that show, there's not too much to give them scale, because there's nothing really man-made there. Again, there's no glasses to compare it to or anything, like I was saying with Avenue Q. They were just in these caves for the most part.
Yeah, and even when they're interacting with Doc, they're never or almost never in the same frame. So it's just it's very hard to understand scale.
So that, but then again, I got to see some of the Sesame Street characters up close, and they were smaller. I was already a little bit not as shocked, because after seeing the Avenue Q ones. So, but yeah, I got to hold Cookie Monster and had him on. I was like, oh wow, like look, this is so interesting. It's different than I expected. And the thing that was the most shocking to me is they took me back to where all the puppets were stored, and they're all stored in these cardboard boxes, and they were showing me around. And they pulled one out, and it was the Count, who is one of my favorite characters from a design standpoint. I just think there's so many beautiful things in his design and how it's executed. They took it out and they showed me. I was like, wow, that's so cool. And then I asked, and I was like, oh, like, do you know how old that puppet is? Because I was trying to get a sense of how often they refurbish stuff. Because even me, like, I refurbish stuff all the time, or I'll build a new character a couple years later. And then he said, oh, let me check. And they looked at the tag where it was written. I think it said 1982. I was like, what? 1982? This puppet's older than me. I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, oh, that's why they're probably not hiring very often. If they only make a puppet every 40 years, you're not going to need to hire many puppet builders. Obviously they do, though, because they do new projects all the time. But that was my thinking in the moment. I was like, whoa. But I was just,
I think one time when I was at the shop, I met Raleigh Cruson for the first time, and she literally had like 6 Grovers that she was working on in front of her, because they were all going off to co-productions and stuff throughout the country. So it's funny how you could have like a count from 82 and 6 Grovers all in the same, with and characters that are the same age more or less. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like you could, almost draw a line in the sand of your puppets from before that Sesame trip and after, because I think not only the scale was different, but I remember the just the fabric in your mouth plates, or not in your mouth plates, but like on the inside of the mouth was different because you started using some stretchy materials. And
Yeah. Before that, I was only using felt, which is fine. And every once in a while, I still use it. Depends on the project. But I was exclusively using felt, and then I switched to different types of velvets, which I often still switch to whatever I kind of have on hand. But yeah, that was a big change there. But again, changing the scale helps so much because there's certain things you just can't achieve once it's much bigger.
Right.
And it just kind of like tightens everything up and makes it look really nice. Yeah, having it smaller. It's the biggest mistake I see almost all puppet builders do is they make their puppets too big when they're beginning.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that ends up having ripple effects all the way around because you're wasting material, or you're spending too much on material. They get heavier. They like everything multiplies. Just from choosing the right size of a mouth or whatever.
Yeah. Well, sometimes people are always looking for longer fur, and unless you get custom fur from National Fiber, it's only going to be about 3 inches for stuff that you can just get off the rack. So how can you create the illusion of it being longer? It's like make your character smaller so you can really, especially if it's going to be something for film, you can really kind of cheat with using that as an effect. But after I came back from New York, so I started changing my building in that time and, putting more focus on it, doing some different techniques, making my puppets smaller. And, I learned a lot on that. But then another big thing that kind of like was a big push for me in the puppetry direction was when I took John Tartagula's course. His puppetry intensive course that he did on like film puppetry. I
forgot you did that.
Yeah, I remember I took that was in I think that was in 2011 or 2012 as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I just saw an ad for it online, and I think it was designed for people who live in New York City. But I saw it and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go to this thing. It was a 2-day thing, but since I was coming from out of town, I sent them an email like, hey, is it okay if I only do 1 day? And they're like, oh, sure. And I did that, and I got my my plane ticket to fly out that morning. It was like all day. And I met a lot of friends there who I am still friends with today. It was from 9 a.m. to maybe I don't know, 2, 3, maybe 4 o'clock in the evening. It was an all day thing. But I remember the night before, I was out to dinner with my friends, and I got an email, looked at my phone, and it said that my flight had been canceled. I was like,
oh, I forgot
my flight had been canceled because of weather. Yeah. And my flight had been canceled, and it was rescheduled to leave at 1 p.m. I was like, well, that's not going to work. I can't do that. So I just and it was a late dinner too. And I was I just stood up. I was like, I got to go. And I wasn't even, just for how much of a procrastinator I was too, I wasn't even packed yet. So I just drove home packed and then bought a bus ticket that left at midnight. So I had a half hour to pack quick and then drive to the bus. Had Maria drive me to the bus station, and here's the thing. So from Buffalo to New York, it's a 45-minute flight, but it's a 7-hour drive. And if you are on a bus, it's a 9-hour drive because of the stops and the way that they go. So yeah, and I just took a garbage bag full of puppets, and this huge backpack with personal stuff in it. And just got on this bus and we drove. And I can't sleep on a bus either. I was like, oh, gosh. So I drove. I didn't sleep at all. But the other thing that was kind of nice about it, too, actually, I don't know how this would have even turned out if I did take the plane, because I wouldn't have necessarily known how to get from the airport to where I was going, because I know nothing about New York City.
Yeah.
But just so happened that the bus dropped me off. One of the stops was right in front of where the place was. And it dropped me off at 9 o'clock right when this thing started. And so it was so perfect. But I was like a zombie that whole time just because I hadn't slept at all. And I was just frazzled in general and hungry and uncomfortable. And it was just, yeah. But anyway, being at that event was so inspiring to me because it was like the first time that I was around other people who were really interested in this. Because like I said before, then I was working with theater people who liked acting and used the puppets as an opportunity to act. And we were friends at that time too. But it was someone beyond that I didn't know.
Oh, of course.
More of a puppet community, people who had like these same goals. It was so inspiring. I think that's where I met John Cody. Jake Bazell was there. I believe Austin was there too, and a bunch of other people too. And I just learned so much. And John was an amazing teacher, learning all the techniques. But also Bonnie Erickson was there as a guest, and she showed this amazing video with a bunch of her work. She took all kinds of questions from us, and it was such an inspiring thing. And from that moment, after that class, I was like, yeah, this is what I need to do. I need to focus more on this. And ever since then, it's been, hit the ground rolling. And then I had other opportunities that were equally as exciting. Like when your Geppetto Festival had like the same kind of experience in that. And then, of course, going to the O'Neill and meeting all these people. And that was an even bigger community of people that were had these same kind of goals. So
Right, for sure. I don't remember if I've ever asked you this. Did you get a critique from either Bonnie or John about the puppets that you brought?
I'm trying to remember. What I did do is I printed out like portfolios that with like pictures of my work and stuff. And that's something I want to talk about a little bit later on in this too, is portfolios. But I gave a copy to each of them just to be familiar with my work or see what I do, and to look at, very nice. That's Bonnie Erickson. Come on, right?
Right.
Yeah, and John, I think John was impressed. I think John was like, oh wow, these are really nice puppets, and especially because like I think people were to bring their own puppets, and because I brought extra and mine were pretty decent, a lot of people were also asked to use mine, which is totally fine. There's no reason for them just to be sitting there.
Yeah,
I think John was a little grateful that I had extra puppets for people. More so even to just try a different type of puppet, like a live hand one versus a rotted one. But yeah, I had some positive feedback from that. But again, since then I've learned and grown so much.
Well, and that early portfolio, just based on your timeline, probably had some Muppet replicas too, like which aren't in your portfolio at all anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that was actually one of my questions to them, is like, because I did have a couple Muppet replicas in there, and I asked them, like, is this okay to have in there because of what it is, And I've asked that question to a lot of professionals, and I've gotten very, very mixed reactions. Some people say, absolutely not. It's copyrighted stuff. You don't want it in there. I was like, oh, yeah, of course, that makes perfect sense. But then the other side to it is people would say like, oh no, this is really this shows that you're able to replicate something, because that's what a lot of these studios want. Like you just said, if they have 6 Grovers, they don't want the other one to be pretty close, They want it to be exact. And if you have a skill of being able to do that, that looks good too. But and to be honest, I never really got a definitive answer. One that I would be comfortable recommending to people necessarily. Yeah. However, I know actually, I guess what I would recommend is to just don't do replicas. Just don't do replicas. Do your own work and just try to make it as polished as you can. And a good way of showing that is to have like a sketch first and show that sketch come to fruition and see how close it is there. Because that is something that has even more value than just copying some work. That's what I would say.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, this is something, like you said, you don't want to recommend any, kind of bad advice, but something that I heard, I think this was John Little who said this, but I could be wrong, is that if you're able to, like, change, like, it's okay if you copy another character if you've changed the medium. So, like, if you're rebuilding an Oscar as a puppet, that's not great. But if you're, making a Buzz Lightyear as a puppet, that's again, it's always best to do your own original stuff, but that shows not only an ability to, you know, be able to match a design, but also an additional skill of changing something that is a cartoon into a real 3-dimensional thing, or even better if you change a Cogsworth or a Lumiere, or like, a 2D cartoon.
It takes special skill to be able to do that. I'm not saying I do that perfectly, but those are, I don't mind. So I love doing different projects all the time. I get the most gratification out of doing my own designs, but once in a while it is fun to do that. So like I've done that. This is the second one that I'm really doing like that. I did the Figment puppet, which was a lot of fun, very challenging. And even though it is an established character, there's still a lot of design choices I had to make because there's so many different references. It is a cartoon, it as an animatronic, it is a walk around character, and I kind of blended those into one that kind of, even though it's not my character, and even though it's based on this design, it still had a little bit of my own touch into it. And that's what I would say also about this, the Baby Yoda puppet that I'm doing as well. It's kind of like my own interpretation of it. And it's funny that you mentioned Buzz Lightyear, because that is one of my goals. It's one for the longest time.
I know it is.
That's the one. I actually had bought materials to start it like literally like 9 years ago, and it's sitting right over there. One day I'll do it. It's not happening soon though.
No, I know. And I think even like when you did the Chewbacca replica.
Oh, I forgot about that
which
one.
which wasn't a replica. It was like truly like an art, a new representation of him, because it wasn't even like, oh, this is a Muppet style hand puppet that is trying to match the costume. It was like really a new interpretation of it. So you've got all this really wonderful building advice, and people could look at your tutorials and stuff online, but like, is there a cardinal rule that you have, like something that if people don't take anything else away from this chat, like something that you could recommend to people as some advice for puppet building?
A lot of people just ask me in general, like, how do I become a better puppet builder? And the one piece of advice I would give to anybody who wants to improve their puppet building skills tenfold is to learn how to make clothing. Because I see a lot of people that make puppets and then have someone else do the clothing, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But learning how to actually make clothing and to make it the right way are techniques that transfer to puppet building really, really well. That's part of how I was able to, gain my skills so fast, because I had a sewing background. We kind of breezed over it, but I used to work in a costume shop. I used to I do a lot of dressmaking as well in my time, making lots of dresses for my wife, as well as for costumes for things like, and I did some tailoring as well to make an actual tuxedo and suit. Those types of skills transfer so well to puppet building. It'll just give an extra polish on your work that you can't really get any other way, even by making more puppets, because clothing has to fit so well, and there's a much smaller tolerance for mistake in clothing. Okay, whereas again, if you see a puppet that's kind of a little bit off, you could say that was a design flaw. But if the sleeve on your jacket is like this, no one's gonna think that's a design
right
of the jacket. They're gonna know, okay, that's just wrong. So yes, definitely highly recommend people really look into, and if you're gonna do one project, I would say try to make a blazer. That's what I would say. It's very ambitious, and it was actually I think it was the first real sewing project I did. And again, when it was done, it was unwearable, but I learned such a wealth of knowledge from making this one. And then the second one I made was wearable. Okay. Yeah. And then in the same way the puppet building is, but again, it uses special techniques that you can really only learn by doing it. And so learn to make a dress, learn to make a jacket, things like that. And if you want to see some of the dresses I made, I'll link to a video over there. So
great. Yeah, no, I love that. So yeah, I wanted to just talk about, at the risk of mischaracterizing you, something that as we've described all these experiences that you've had of seeing other puppetry or seeing, different plays as a high schooler and seeing magic, I feel like you're a competitive sponge, that like you absorb all this information around you, and then you want to do it better than what you've seen. Like you go to the O'Neill and you see all of Krupa's mechs and you're like, this is great. I'm going to take it and run with it. Back when I was still building more and more puppets, like I'll never forget, I made an Oscar the Grouch puppet, and then like I think the next day or 2 days later, you made your Oscar the Grouch puppet, and Maria went and said to you like, "Too soon, Adam." But
really?
You made, oh yeah. But you made an excellent Oscar, and then you made an even better one because you wanted to like get better and better at it. So, I guess first of all, would you say that's at all accurate? But also, like, can you talk about like, is that drive just you, like, can you describe that drive, or can you?
Sure.
Yeah.
I can try to. To be honest, like, it's interesting that you say competitive, because I don't see myself as really having a competitive bone in my body. I really don't. I just kind of like try to do what I do. But I don't even really remember the situation exactly, but I'm sure it happened. But I probably just thought like, oh God, that looks so fun to build. He probably had fun building it. I want to build one too.
Yeah.
And especially, again, that was at a time where I was, as per your and Zach's recommendations, hey, build this, build that,
Right.
And I was like, oh, that'd be a really fun one to do. And I think it was probably one of the most fun ones to do.
Yeah. I think probably one of your best replicas as well, the final Oscar that you made.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. It was a lot of fun to build, and that's really what it is. Because I'm not competitive. If anything, that's one thing that people, that's one thing I've been told a lot, that people are surprised by how uncompetitive I am. And this is I'm talking more about things like growing up in high school, doing sports and stuff. Like that's part of why I have little to no interest at all. I have no interest at all in sports. Never did. The only sport I did in high school was wrestling. And because of that, I think it was more so because it was kind of more independent compared to all the other things that were more team. And I love working on a team. It's fine. But and not in sports, it's so competitive, and I just never got it.
Sure.
I just never got it. I just like doing what I do, and and just learning from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I suppose maybe competitive is the wrong word, but like just highly driven, because you do see different projects, or again, I keep coming back to the Yoda thing just because it's what you're working on right now, but like you see the different mechs that are available, what you already have, what your knowledge, taking the inspiration from that design and just sucking all that in and being like, all right, I'm gonna do my own now, and I'm just gonna like have this this passion and this drive to make a new thing.
I don't see it as just to go back to that again, not as much as competitive, as much as like giving myself a challenge. Because to be honest, a lot of these things, I don't know how they're going to turn out. Unfortunately, I don't always plan it, every single thing, as that far in ahead. Even the Yoda that I'm working on now, I sculpted the head and I was done with it. And then I draped the head pattern. And then I decided I wanted to add all that detail on top of the head. So then I just did it. And then didn't even redo the fabric pattern, because I figured there was enough clearance in order and the fabric has enough stretch to be able to get around that detail anyway. And it all worked out. And a lot of it, I'm just kind of building it up as I go. And I have a goal at the end, and it doesn't always... The goal, I always reach it because my goal is just to make something I'm proud of, rather than making sure it looks exactly like this, which I'm capable of doing that too if I'm working from a literal design. But generally, when I'm building for myself, I just go with the idea, because if I sit down and sketch it all out first, if it's something for a client, I will, But if it's just for me, I'm a very forgiving client to myself. So if I want to change something along the way, I just do it, and then like, okay, well, But yeah, again, that's part of why I do each build. I try to learn something or try to learn something in doing a new build and try to stretch my skills a little bit. Because obviously this is one that has the most mechs in it all in one puppet that I've ever did.
Yeah.
Which is another thing. I've done all these mechs. I've done the ear mech. I've done the eye blink. I've done the mouth. I've never done all of them into one. And doing them all in one is harder than doing any of them by itself, because they all have to not get in each other's way. Yeah. And that's something that I'm learning in this. And there's things I would have done differently. And there's things I will do differently next time. But it works so far.
Yeah. There's a quote that I always... I not only come from a family of teachers, but I come from a family of Catholic teachers. And there's a saint that they always reference, which is who said that he's the patron saint of teachers, and said about how, I never knew I wanted to be a teacher who is involved in all these different things. But I said yes once, and I kept saying yes and yes and yes, yes, yes. And I got to this place where if you had asked me in the beginning if I wanted to be here, I would have said, no, there's no way, that's not possible. And I think that's so true about, any experience that people go through. But I think it really mirrors your journey of who would have thought you'd be here the first time that you saw the Terry Angus Sebastian puppet, right?
Yeah.
It's inconceivable. Or even your YouTube stuff that you do now. I'm sure if you told your past self, hey, you're going to be doing a video a week, no, I'm not. but you do it and you put it out. Or all the mechs that you put in Yoda, it's a gradual build.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing. Because people always say to have a goal, and if that was my goal, I don't know if I would have achieved it, and it may have just been gotten in my way. I mean,
right.
Again, I think the best way to describe what I'm doing is do whatever makes you happy right now, and you'll thank yourself later. Yeah. That's how I ended up doing everything that I'm doing now, just because it was one thing after another. Oh, this looks like a fun opportunity. Let me try it. Oh, that worked? Good. I'm going to keep going in that direction. Oh, I tried this one too. Oh, that didn't work. Well, I won't go in that direction anymore. Just follow the path of least resistance that's still stretching your creative muscles, especially in industry like this.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic advice. And you're a really wonderful example that people could look to for that. So somewhere along the way, you met a fool named Cameron Garrity.
I sure did.
How'd that ruin your life?
Oh, Cameron Garrity. I hope he doesn't watch this.
I think he might see it.
No, sometime. It did. Again, we've said it many times before, but again, I think that we are different enough that it really has stretched me creatively to do things that I wouldn't have done. I do more often work from a design if I have to, whereas that probably would have been work that I just wouldn't have been interested in before. But going through those types of processes with you has taught me the value in being able to be more regimented in process. And I do it, and I've added it to my own work more than it may have seemed like I was talking about earlier. But definitely, there's a lot of value in having a plan, and that's something that I have learned in working with you, and also in presenting work as well. Because that's one thing I did want to get back to as well as the portfolio stuff. But
oh yeah, I have that coming up. So yeah.
Yeah, the process, because even like this podcast alone, which was an idea I had a couple of years ago now, and was really inspired by a couple things. First of all, when we did that Skype chat with Kirk Thatcher, remember that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, that we asked what that was. Sorry, just for people, for them to understand, it was we asked him to critique our mini dental implant commercial, right?
Yes,
And then it just became like a talk. I think we talked with him for
I think I just sent him a random message and said, "Hey, would you?"
over an hour or so.
Yeah, and he gave us a lot of encouragement. He liked a lot of things about it, and it was great. And in a lot of ways, even though that wasn't a direct through line to this podcast, I think in a lot of ways that was inspiration, as well as like when I went to another event that I went to, which helped me in being deeper interested in puppetry, was an evening with Dave Goles. It was, that was in Connecticut, and I think it was through the O'Neill kind of. I'm not exactly sure how that was.
Yeah,
branded.
it was hosted by the O'Neill, but it was at. They do a speaker series in the winter, of some kind. I don't think it's like super regular necessarily, and that was one of those events that they did.
Yeah, when I saw that was available, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go to this, because in so many ways, he's an inspiration to me, but in his lineage of how he became a puppeteer, because he started off as a builder too, and he didn't have that much confidence in the performing, which are things that I related to. And even the character, his main character, of course, Gonzo, which is a self-acclaimed weirdo, and in a lot of ways I think of myself that way. And also just the design of that character, with the feathers and the nose, the sculpted, the mechanism, everything about that is just something that is like my kind of puppetry. And so I went to this wonderful event. It was almost like a little talk show, the way it was set up. They filmed it. I wish I would come out somehow in some way. And I got a picture with him after. He was so nice, and seeing that chat was like, oh man, there needs to be more of this type of thing. And so in a way that also kind of inspired this podcast, as well as the main thing, which was the icing on the cake, is just like, I think I had a talk with John Little one time, and then I was just like, you know what, man, I want a reason to talk to more of my puppet friends, and not only do I want a reason to do it, I think other people might enjoy and or find value in listening to some of these different artists talk. And then after all those three things happened over the course of a couple of years, I was it kind of, podcasting became more of a thing. I was like, let's do it. Let's just do it. And then I decided Cameron Garrity would be my co-host. Which was great, because again, we come to it from very, in my first inspiration, it was really going to be a lot more rough around the edges, and then you had ideas to kind of make it a little bit more of a show, having some questions that we always ask, as well as, but still leaving it very conversational the way that I wanted to. And I think the marriage between the two ways we would approach this type of project of having a podcast came together in a way that we independently, neither of us would have created a show like this.
Totally.
And I think it's a perfect example of how different we work. And for all clarity, all the graphics, all the Instagram posts, all that's all Cameron. I don't touch any of that. I haven't done any of that. That's all Cameron doing his graphic stuff, and it's very clean looking on the website. Like, that's all Cameron's mindset, and that's the polish around a relatively free-form conversation that we have.
But yeah, so I want to figure out the right way to ask this, but like in those early years, us working together, I see what benefit I got from hanging around you, because like from my perspective, I was lifelong puppetry lover, and here walks in this amazing puppet builder, who has this this wonderful portfolio even back then, and you're constantly building and making, and I didn't love puppet building necessarily. Like, I did it out of necessity. So I understand the benefit that I got from hanging out with you, but like, why'd you keep me around? like why'd you keep answering my texts?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. I mean, I guess in the same way that I respond to pretty much all my comments on everything is,
Yeah.
it's just because like I like being around other creative people and other people that want to do something. Like I'm never short of doing. My problem is I have too many projects, and I'm trying to do all of them 100%, which is good. It's part of what keeps me sane, keeping myself busy with all that stuff. And someone else who's got an equal drive to create something and create something nice is generally someone I want to work with, as long as I have the time for it. And that's what it was. It was someone else that also, one thing that I for myself that I've found, and I've just come to this over time, is like, I don't wait for anyone's permission to do something. If I want to do something, I'm just going to do it. I don't wait. A lot of people, again, I don't say this in a way of, negative to people, but a lot of people like wait for a project to join on to. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you might wait a long time though. And what if two come at the same time? Then you got to pick. That's a good problem to have. But like, I'm just gonna do what I want to do. And you were someone who was also doing that. You were doing stuff even before we met. You were doing your own little puppet shows. Right around that time is when you were doing that show, something that was supposed to be show. And you were already doing stuff. And when we have two people working together like that, it just makes it all the better, especially with two different backgrounds like that.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And that's what's been so, I think, fruitful about the way we're able to work. As you said, is that we have those different skills that you would need to be able to do a successful anything, and we could work just fine on our own. But you have the skills that I need, and I have the skills, that complement you, and I think that's a great summation of that. Two other things that I just wanted to talk about, because it's one of my favorite things that I got to work on with you, and it was your main, it was your thesis project, and the sort of the main thing through grad school and in getting your teaching degree was Arlo's Art Show. Can you describe for the people who maybe don't know or have seen it peripherally what that show is and kind of why you did it in the first place was?
Yeah. No, I was going to college for my master's for art education. And, for a master's project, you kind of can do whatever you want as long as it's, based around what your major is, which mine was art education. So I thought, why just, a lot of people did all kinds of, just did a paper or something interesting, which I did have to do a paper, but I was like, I want to make it into something that I'm actually going to be not only proud of, but maybe in some way could be part of something that could continue, Yeah. Because a lot of the projects, not all of them, but a lot of them just kind of, they do the project just to be done with the graduate school. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I want to create like an idea for a show. So this was over the course of years, and because some people think it started, because like when I first posted about it, it was already designed and developed and names and stuff for years to come. But Arlo's Art Show was, I kind of like the alliteration of that, the Arlo's Art Show. And I thought it would come up with a nice, theme song, easier with that kind of alliteration. And, in the development of this whole show was just to, one thing that we knew for the project was, learning from television works, and Sesame Street was the, quintessential example of that. Can children learn through television? That's what Joan Gans Cooney was trying to discover, and she did. So the show, the idea for it was kind of like a late night style show, but an art show. So it's kind of like, Stephen Colbert meets, Bob Ross meets Reading Rainbow, the way that they'd go into these other kind of worlds and stuff is kind of the inspiration for it. It was kind of like another show that's always been very inspiring to me is like Bill Nye the Science Guy, because I think it's really good education with engagement as well. Because that's one of my main philosophies of this is that a lot of people, when they try to do educational content, they put the educational part higher than the entertainment. And that sounds like the right thing to do. But the problem is, if you don't have their attention, none of the education is going to go through anyway. So as a teacher, it's kind of a little hard to say that the entertainment's more important, but it is, because what you need from these people, from these kids, is their attention, and you're not going to necessarily get the attention through the entertainment. I mean, through the education. You do it through the entertainment. So entertain them and then teach them, rather than teach them and then entertain them, which is also kind of the philosophy generally as me as an art teacher as well. And this was just a fun way of doing that with puppets for my graduate project that just turned into a piece that I'm very happy with. Now, I've gotten a lot of comments on the video. People like, oh, too bad the show didn't go anywhere. I was like, I never really pitched it anywhere. I just kind of like did it. And again, the idea of it wasn't necessarily to pitch it to like a studio or anything. Because first of all, I mean, that's all changing the way that works now with the internet anyway. But I would say in order to continue something like that, we would have to pare it down for an online show for something that we were going to produce, because that first episode was overproduced. I think we can both admit that, even though...
And it was arduous.
Yes, we decided to film during a snowstorm in January in my garage with no heat, which was just like, brilliant idea, but I had a deadline. So, but yeah, it was, obviously Arlo is like my main character that I do. It's the one that I'm most comfortable with improving with and using in the classroom and all types of things. So,
well, that's what I was going to say, is that even though the show hasn't like continued, the character certainly has. And you do, at school, I know you do morning announcements, and you do like reading with different teachers. And then you sometimes interview like authors and illustrators and other artists and stuff, right, with him too, that your kids could see?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big collaboration with my school librarian. She's on Twitter as CC the librarian, and she's so well connected with authors and things, people of that nature. And she was always doing interviews and chatting with them, and to give the kids a more hands-on experience that these authors and for me, these artists are not just other people. I feel like you read the name on the book and it's this untouchable person, and you kind of learn they're a whole person. So in the same way that, it's one thing if she just interviewed the author, kids would like that and they'd get a lot of value out of it. But if she does it with Arlo interviewing this author, it makes it not just something that the kids can get value from, but maybe also they really want to watch, Right. And I think that's something that it's become a great tool, especially for us as a team.
Yeah, I mean, they're super fun videos. I really recommend anybody who is listening to this to check out those videos, because they're super fun. And the guest that you guys are able to get, I didn't realize it was that she was connected with a lot of them online and stuff. They're wonderful videos. I really, really enjoy it. Another thing about your work, and you kind of started to talk about this with Arlo, is that you not only had to make the show, but you had to present it to people. Can you talk about your philosophy when you put together a kind of like portfolio piece, and showing that work to other people, either for jobs or just to like show and get critique from other artists?
Yeah, and a portfolio can be very important, and it's one thing that I learned a lot. I learned early that a portfolio is important, but I learned a little bit later about how polished it should be to present your work, because I was always taking photos and taking pictures that I thought were nice, until I went to the O'Neill, and then I asked for a critique from Richard Termini, and he was looking at my portfolio. He's like, "Wow, your work is so great, but you really need to take better pictures of them." And I was like, "What?" Like I think they look good. Obviously, I'm talking to a professional photographer who's like he knows what he's talking about. And then I didn't know that it's funny. It's one of those things, you don't know what you don't know. You just don't know what you don't know. And once I got a DSLR, and even the first picture I took and then looked at it, I was like, that's how they do it. It's like depth of field. I mean, like it's amazing what going beyond just a cell phone picture. Okay. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, and one thing I will say, there's nothing wrong in using a cell phone too. One thing is, obviously the best camera you have is the one that's with you when the moment counts. But if you're going to do studio photos of your work and stuff, you really want to make it look good. Because one thing that Richard said to me is like, you can take a puppet that's not even that nice and take a really good photo of it and make it look amazing. And he said, your work is already nice. You got to show it. You got to see that even better. Because I can see that through these photos, but a nice picture will just like take it a lot further. And from that point forward, I started taking nicer photos. And then also, working with you about also more than just a photo, but also laying it out in a nice way is also important.
I loved the project that we worked on together. Was it late? Yeah, I guess it was late last year. Was that postcard that we did, spent I think 2 days we had to get together to lay out all those to pose the characters and get them look right
and take those photos too. And those photos were nice. I think we could have spent a little bit more time on the photos, but it really came together pretty nice, especially considering how quickly we, and mostly you, once it's actually putting together, was able to put it together. So that worked out really nice. Yeah. But
what did you learn when? Because again, another one of my favorite ways that you've been able to display your work, and not just because it happened at the Geppetto Festival, but was your gallery exhibit of all of your characters. And again, we spent a lot of time posing the characters and creating a history for them and like just presenting them in that gallery at Damon. Did you get a new appreciation for your characters and how they fit into like quote unquote the art world, or like it's anything like what did you learn from posing your characters like that and displaying them for the public?
I learned that there's more that you can do with them than just having it like that. Because honestly, if someone just told me to put up my puppets, I would have just made a bunch of polls, made sure they looked like they were smiling and looked nice and just like this. But part of what you were doing with that too is you were kind of telling a little bit of a story with each one, with like how he posed the bear in this type of a way. And then even like the old man character from Before Christmas, like he was sleeping on the couch type of thing. And even the rabbit and the magician puppets, when they were displayed together in a way that he was presenting something and then the rabbit was reacting, again, rather than just them both like a profile picture of all of them. And there's a lot to say about that, not just for presenting it in a gallery, but even just using that type of a technique more so, and even taking my photos of these characters for portfolio work, or just things like that.
I love that. One other question before we get into the your puppeteers, and I'm terrified to ask this because you asked me last week, and I could only imagine that you have your answer ready to go already. But what is your least favorite thing about working with Cameron Garrity?
Oh my goodness, that was just I said that off the fly too.
Oh, okay. I just assumed that was locked and loaded, and you.
No, it was not locked and loaded. I didn't know why. I didn't even know why I said it. I was just like, and it was such a poor way of phrasing the question. It was better ways to say that. What's the thing I can't stand about Cameron? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I would say the hardest thing about working with Cameron Garrity is because of the way his mindset is working, like things planned, is a lot of times I'm like, I think a lot of times I'm so excited and hot to do something that I want to kind of do it now or like right away. And you're like, oh, well, you have other things scheduled already. So it's hard. So I have to remember to also just like plan ahead with things like this. Like if it was up to me for doing the podcast, I'd like, oh, let's do a podcast tomorrow. And then you'd be like, oh, I have something to do tomorrow. I was like, oh, come on. So like, again, that's why you do a lot of the scheduling for the podcast and things like that, because that's the way the world works. That's the way the world works.
Yes.
And
well, and I what I'll say about that is that you live in your podcast studio, and for me, it's at least a half hour away. And if we're doing it like after work, during rush hour, it could be even longer than that. So,
But if you loved it, you'd drop everything and come over right away. If you really loved it, Cameron. No, that's true. That's true. No, I never really thought of it that way, but
yeah.
No, yeah. And luckily, it's never
I
really
think
been
that's
too
fair.
much of a problem anyway, because either way, we have to still schedule it with our guests and stuff. So,
Right.
But
Right.
even for other projects and stuff, like again, a lot of times I'm working on stuff in the middle of the night, and
Yes.
that's not a reasonable time to get help from other people in general.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I would say is that unfortunately you're not in my pocket and pulled out whenever I need you.
Right.
Which is an unreasonable
I-
thing to
After when Carol Spinney passed away last December, I reread, because it's a pretty light book, but his Wisdom of Big Bird, and he talked about his relationship with Jim Henson and that. And Jim once asked him, like in one of their first meetings, like, so are you a night owl? And Carol was like, oh no, I need like 8 hours of sleep every night. And he was like, oh, okay. And I feel like that's a good encapsulation of you and me.
That is pretty good. That's good.
That's
yeah.
exactly it. Because you'll
it.
text me at like 10 o'clock, like, hey, can we have a quick talk? And I'm like, nah, I'm in my pajamas. I've
Not
I've got
me.
my warm milk and I'm ready to turn in.
No, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
True.
So anyhow, do you have a good puppeteer story for us as we wrap up?
Oh my gosh.
A time where something didn't go right, but now we get to laugh about it in hindsight.
Gosh. Can I be honest? I completely forgot. I actually forgot about this question, and I don't have something prepared.
Hey, look at your mug.
I know, right? Oh gosh. Because when you said that in a moment,
The
like we're
name
gonna be
of the
getting to it, I
show.
started thinking, I'm like, oh gosh, I gotta think of something now. Oh gosh, I don't even. It's hard. It's so hard for me because I've thought about that, for so long. Just like, I kind of don't really. I can't think of anything. I'm sure that I have them. Is like, I guess it's just like my normal philosophy of just keeping everything as a learning opportunity. That I don't think of anything in a negative way. Not that it has to be a negative story. It's something kind of funny that happened, but like I just kind of don't think of things that way. I don't have it categorized that way in my brain, so it's kind of hard for me to pull out. However, if you're thinking of something that I've told you before,
that's what I was.
Yeah,
I was
I
hoping
could-
you
I
would.
could
You
tell
would
you a
keep
story.
giving- yeah, no, I'm trying to
give me a little help.
think-
You can definitely give me a story. If
Yeah,
I ask
yeah.
Zach, hey Zach, what's a puppeteer story I have? Oh, he'd probably have 10 for me. He'd probably
Right.
have 10 for me. Like, so we used to do the 48 every year, the 48-hour film challenge, where you have 48 hours to write, film, direct, edit a short film. And it's not a puppet. There are puppetry ones, but we always did just our local film ones, but we did puppetry in them. That was our thing as our group.
Yeah.
And we did it every year. And I always signed up early because you get a discount with the early bird special. Sign up. And then it just, the day always just comes, And the way I told you, that I don't put stuff on a calendar or plan stuff out is because also I rarely have multiple things happening at once. And that year I did. Yeah.
What was it? Because I remember the story.
Well, it happened to be the same day as my wedding shower. The wedding shower for my wife, which I was going to, and like I think I was doing the sound for the music and stuff, as well as just like being there, and oh boy, yeah, I didn't realize that until I think it was even like the day before, because again, my wife did most of the organizing for that because that's something that she enjoys doing, and and I enjoy it, but I just again. The organizing of that kind of stuff I don't enjoy as much as like being there and doing the festivities and getting the festivities ready and things like that. But realizing that we had our shoot for this 48 at the same time as this is my wedding shower. And that was a stressful day in many ways because we were in too deep. We could not do it.
Mm-hmm.
We could not do the 48.
No.
But it's my wedding shower too. So I had to bow out for a couple hours and go. And oh gosh, it was the best worst day ever. which what actually
That was
ended
the
up being the title of the show as well. So not only was it the best day, the best worst day ever for me personally, best day because wedding shower. And, being able to do puppet stuff with my friends. But worse because it was all happening at once.
Right.
And ended up being, this was right when I was into the YouTube stuff too, because we used that same character. And, oh, man, it just turned out not good.
Yeah.
It just
Well,
turned
and
out.
as I recall, you also, because we were using the same character that you were building for your YouTube series, and it had to get finished because I think he needed his costume still. Yeah. So you also had to film a YouTube tutorial and explaining things to the camera.
You blow that out too. That doesn't add that much time. You just had it happen anyway. You may as well film it, right? It adds at most 5 minutes. Just hitting the camera and saying, "Hey, now I'm doing this." Boom. But yes, I was. There's a lot of. I'm juggling a lot of things at once, and sometimes I forget that there's a ball in the air. Or a couple balls in the air. I thought I was juggling 2 balls. I'm really trying to juggle 8. It's like, oh boy,
right.
It's only because there's 2 in my hand at a time.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, I would say that was definitely a stressful day, and actually a testament to how not to do things, because it did affect the project in not being a great piece of work, which maybe we'll actually finally release it. I don't think we've ever released it because I think we've been. Is it released?
I don't think you have it released on your YouTube channel,
No,
but it is available. It's this whole time because it won awards. It won the most awards that we've ever received.
Yeah, for the worst thing we've ever did.
For the worst thing we've ever done. But so it's on the website at the
there's so many problems with it. Camera stuff filmed at different frame rates, so it looks like jittery, and just things in general not connecting the way you plan it out in your head.
No.
And I don't even think I did any performing on that, because we did all the performing. All the performing had to be done while I was at the thing. So yeah, I got to do a bunch of the pre-plan setup stuff. Maybe one shot I helped with, and then you guys did the performing, and then I came back and I think I did the editing, didn't I?
Yeah, it was just a rough thing overall. Ooh. Especially because that was a musical.
Oh gosh.
So all the audio, the way we figured that we needed to work it, all of the audio needed to be edited. And kind of locked before we ever filmed anything, which meant that the edit had to be to the audio, which wasn't recorded right. And it was in a million ways a mess. So
yeah. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was definitely a time that I had puppeteers.
Yes, for sure. It's been really wonderful to talk to you, but for people who are interested, how could they get in touch or find more of your work?
Find more of my work. A good way. The most current thing is always, I think, my Instagram, which is just at Adam Krutinger. That's always where my go-to if I'm just going to post something right now that I'm working on. It's the first thing. The second would be the Facebook page. Krutinger Puppets, which some of those are feeds into from Instagram, but there's also some original stuff there sometimes. If you want to learn more about making puppets or about learning puppetry, my YouTube channel, which is what you're watching this on right now, is a good way to do that. But also, if you want to get more in depth into that, we have a Facebook group that's been doing very well, and a lot of people sharing what they're working on. The Krutinger Puppet Tutorial Q&A. It's actually the best way to get a hold of me if you have a question about one of the videos or puppet building.
And a lot of people, that's a nice little community where sometimes even some of the people in it will beat you to the questions that get answered. And there's a lot of knowledge there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so if you have a question, it'll be... I've already answered a lot of things there. So sometimes people say, "Oh, I asked that question a month ago. Here's what he said," which is grateful too. So you'll find out your information really fast. And also in general, a lot of the questions are things that are already out there. Like, "Oh, can you make a video on how to, do an eye blink?" Well, okay. Well, yeah. If you just type in Krutinger Puppets eye blink, it'll come up. So yeah, I would just recommend to people in general, if you just type in like my name and your question, chances are I already did a video on it.
Great. All right. Well, Adam Krutinger, it has been so wonderful to have you on Puppeteers. I hope we could have you back on at some point. It's been a really wonderful experience talking to you, and would love to have you involved with the show some way in the future too. So
I'm a busy guy, but I'll try to make time for it.
All right, cool. Thanks so much, bud.
All right, bye. I don't think there's too much of a story there. Hello? Yeah, we're almost done. We're almost done.
We'd be done if he remembered the last question.
We would be done. Oh, gosh.